Good morning. It's a little past after 9 o'clock, and Stewart will be right back, but he told me go ahead and start. I think so we have a quorum. Is that right, Bill?
We do, sir.
Thank you.
Well, it's a beer quorum, but we've got a
Welcome and thank again for joining us for the Committee on Affordability, Accounting and Planning meeting. Please be advised this meeting is being broadcast over the internet and is being recorded. Agenda item number 2 is consideration of approval of the minutes from September 27, 2018 committee meeting. Is there any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I move for approval.
I need a second, please. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. We move on to agenda item number 3, consideration of approval of consent calendar. The consent calendar includes non-controversial items that can be approved without comment or discussion. This allows us to save time for other items that need more of our attention. The consent items are highlighted in the gray on the agenda. There are no consent calendar. Are there any agenda item that anybody would like to move to the consent calendar? Assuming there is no items that anybody would like to move to that, we moved on to the agenda item number 4. Agenda item number 4 is public testimony on agenda items relating to the Committee on Affordability, Accounting and Planning. We do not have any registered to testify, so we will move to the next item, which is 5A, is presentation of enrollment forecast process. Dr. Julie Eckler, Assistant Commissioner for Strategic Planning and Funding, will provide a brief presentation and will be available to answer any question. This item is for information only, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. For my first presentation this morning, I'm going to be explaining the enrollment forecast process. Here at the Coordinating Board, we do an enrollment forecast biennially, and we've been doing so since 1978. Normally, we share a preliminary enrollment forecast at the December CAAP meeting in preparation for presentation at the January board meeting, but we've had a slight change of schedule this year, which I'll explain in a moment. But first, let me tell you a little bit about the purpose of the forecast. The forecast is used for informational purposes to assist both institutions and this agency. The forecast is focused on what student enrollments are projected to be into the future if there are no changes to demographic or geographic drawing patterns. It provides baseline figures for universities, community and technical colleges, and independent colleges and universities. It does not include our for-profit career schools. The forecast is also very beneficial for planning efforts here at the Coordinating Board, and one example of that is the strategic planning process that we went through for the 60 by 30 text plan. The forecast is done every 2 years because demographic and other conditions change. Generally, it's quite accurate in the short term, and it gets less accurate the further out you go in years. So here's the timeline for the process this year. Population projections from the Texas Demographic Center are an important part of the forecast. As you can see here, those were just released, and because we were waiting for them to be completed, we're a little behind our usual schedule. However, we shared the projections with we shared the enrollment forecast with public higher education institutions this week, and will receive institutional comments back by the 21st of December. And we did let the schools know last month that we'd have a little bit of a tighter timeline, so we should be good. Once we receive the institutional comments on the forecast, we will evaluate the comments and make any adjustments that we think appropriate. As I mentioned, we will then share the final enrollment forecast with you in January. We're very pleased that Dr. Lloyd Potter, who heads the Texas Demographic Center, will be with us for the major policy discussion in January. He'll be discussing the new 2018 population projections, of course, those that we just used to do the forecast. And after he completes that, we will be sharing the forecast with the board. So the methodology for the forecast has remained relatively unchanged since we began doing it. For public colleges and universities, it uses 5 years of past enrollment from Texas counties differentiated by age and race ethnicity, and it applies these enrollment rates to population projections prepared by the Demographic Center. So the projections also reflect the historic draw patterns by age and race ethnicity. Forecasts for independent colleges and universities are derived using simple linear regression, also based on 5 years of past data. The methodology for both public and independent institutions does not consider possible future changes that could affect enrollments, such as improvements in high school graduation rates, increases in higher education enrollment by race ethnicity groups, or changes in local policies. For that reason, this forecast is intentionally conservative. It projects future enrollments if current trends continue. One component of the process is that staff adjust the enrollment projections when there are compelling changes at institutions or in local factors that are likely to alter enrollment significantly in the future. So this would be something that would change the historical pattern moving forward. Examples might be major program or facilities expansions, increases in online programs, or local economic factor changes. And so more specifically, for the example of online courses I gave, in 2000, one out of every 100 courses at a university was distance education. And in fall 17, that was 1 out of every 5 courses. And that kind of change can affect enrollment patterns. In terms of facilities expansion, a good example are the 2 campuses that were recently added to the Texas State Technical colleges. Or you may have a situation where a large industry moves into an area and is expected to add large population growth, and they may even require additional training for that industry. So the types of examples I just gave will be accounted for in the adjustments we'll make when we hear back from the schools. They'll let us know if something like this is going on, and if we agree that these are reasons to adjust their approach. But note that these changes are not institutions telling us, for example, that they have some great strategies moving forward for increasing enrollment. We, of course, think that's very positive, but that wouldn't be a reason to change the forecast, even though those efforts might very well increase enrollment over time. And that, again, is part of the reason we do this every 2 years. And finally, it's really important to note that the results often interact in terms of what we're looking at the individual schools. So accelerated enrollment increases at some institutions, perhaps for one of the reasons above, may result in lower increases and slower increases or decreases at other institutions. So if there's something that's pulling students from one area to another, it may affect those enrollments as well. The forecast will reflect past data and new trends, as I mentioned, and since we've not yet completed the work, I'll save the details of what we're actually seeing this year for the January presentation. But I'll note that in the past we've seen, for example, predictable growth in some of our high population regions like the Metroplex, Gulf Coast, Central Texas, and South Texas. And we've seen that the growing economy and energy sector can affect enrollments. Sometimes a growing economy can lead to declining enrollments, for example, in the 2-year sector, though we haven't seen that currently. We've certainly seen that in the past. Population change is clearly an important factor as well in terms of the demographics. But the final thing I want to remind you of is that 60 by 30 text is intended to be a living plan. The state has measurable goals, and the state plan has measurable goals and targets. And careful analysis of the new enrollment forecast numbers and the population projections can help inform review of those goals and targets. And specifically, in this case, the educated population and completion goals. The completion goal, of course, has associated targets with it that consider student demographics. So, of course, this can be very helpful in looking at those. So I think it's going to be a very interesting discussion next month at the major policy issue as we consider the population projections, look at the forecast, and think about any issues we see that might impact higher education in the state moving forward. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so Julie, so I understand, okay, so what the legislature projects for enrollment growth, this is the number that they use, right? In other words, the overall, if what we're arguing for is, fund the formula, INO formula at inflation plus enrollment growth, they're using this number, correct? correct?
So we use, and I'm going to look to David Young, but we use the population projections, correct? When we are looking at the formula funding, we do not use the enrollment forecast.
Okay.
Correct. So it's what we are hearing from the Texas Demographic Center about here's what's going to be happening with the population, but the enrollment forecast involves a little bit more than that, and so that is something that is separate from the formula funding process.
Okay. Well, then what do you use the enrollment forecast for?
So we used it, for example, as I mentioned, for the 60 by 30 tech state planning, as we're trying to see who's attending institutions in different parts of the state, where we see growth. If we see changes, for example, in race ethnicity, for example, if we see schools where the historical pattern has been to not enroll at a high level for certain groups, and those groups are growing in an area, it'll be important for them to understand if you don't consider the changing population in your area, it's going to affect your enrollment based on past trends. Does that help?
Sure, but then you have, okay, so it's population growth for the formula, the amount we're recommending, and then when you actually look at the formula and that semester credit hours, this is per institution, that's an actual number, 12th day of class. Is that right?
Yes,
calculated each year.
Right. So we use the population projections before we get the actual enrollments.
Right.
But we've already received those enrollments this fall, for example, and so we use that data for the error-free enrollments when we send the information to the Legislative Budget Board about the formula funding recommendations. We use the projections when the advisory committees are meeting, when we're thinking about what are the enrollments going to look like, but once we get the actual data in, that is what is used and submitted.
Okay, sorry, but just so to what they get paid on, say, for the 2020 would be the first, or 2020, the first next biennium. Okay, they get paid on which semester credit hours? They
get paid on, well, it's based on, of course, there will be an appropriation, but the money that we send over that's used for the allocation, the information we send over that's used for the allocation will be based on the enrollments in fiscal year 20. So it'll be the summer of 2018, the fall of 2018, and the spring of 2019. Those enrollments are what will be used.
And that's what they get for 2 years for the biennium payment. That's the INO or formula.
They use the 1 year, and of course, use it for 2 years. So.
Gotcha. Okay.
2 years.
I got it.
Sure.
So along that same line, so we don't use the enrollment forecast for formula funding, and it's used just for projections on the 60 by 30 plan and other planning.
In other planning, another good example is I know our regional groups are going to be interested in seeing what it looks like for their regions because they're working on their strategies for improving their enrollments under their completion, so they'll be interested in that.
But there's no money tied to these answers. Does anybody benefit economically based on how they might respond to this or not?
No.
Okay.
There's something more fundamental in the historic reason these have been used, which doesn't have to do with funding, but really overall planning. When institutions submit proposals for programs, they will talk about we're going to be a growing institution, we're not going to be, and it's provides a means to, they typically look like that in their own context. And because we do enrollment forecasts for across the state, what's happening with student movement, that type of thing, it's not used as regularly as it used to be when we approve facilities as well, but it is something to help our staff alert institutions that we're seeing different trends than you are, and that can provoke some good discussions on occasion. At one time, we had some particular difficulty with forecasts for UT San Antonio. They did as well. Neither one of us were very accurate. That was the only school in the state which our staff weren't really very close, within 2%, and they weren't either. And so that evolved in some better understanding of what they were doing for us to help them with what was happening in their community, where they were really drawing students from. And these forecasts actually are the only place where anybody sees how student movements are changing from different parts of the state to another parts of the state. We had one institution that Julie mentioned, race and ethnicity. they had not been very good at drawing minorities, and the counties they typically drew from were going to be heavily minority in the future. And they weren't really aware of that for some reason, so we were able to provide that feedback to them. So there are a number of things, but it's not directly connected to the formula. I'm glad you asked that question because I could see how it might seem it would be.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that, yeah. And it seems to me that I guess the compelling thing that we need to watch is the shift to online. And with the new demographics and the millennial and everything else, that's really where we need to get, everybody needs a heads up because that will affect everything.
Absolutely.
If the trend is that way.
Because obviously students from anywhere in the state in many cases are going to be attending
Commissioner, go
online
ahead,
at different
sir.
places. Yes.
Yeah, it's important to point out to board members that forecasts and actual data have had an impact previously on our plans. For example, we changed the Closing the Gaps plan, I think in 2006, was it, David?
I think it was 4 or 5, somewhere in there.
Yeah, it was after I arrived, but we substantially raised the goals in Closing the Gaps midstream because we found out the text was growing much faster than we had originally predicted, and we raised our completion goal and our number of graduates goal dramatically.
It was primarily the enrollment goal, but that was based primarily on the state demographer's
Right.
population forecast. That's why it's important. We haven't heard from the state demographer for several years. We used to hear every 2 years. I think we need to get back on that schedule because it's really relevant, and
Yeah.
I think it helps the institutions to hear that
And
as well.
one last point, Julie, would you repeat those numbers about the growth of online courses? Because that's a startling number.
This is at universities, and we had about 1 out of every 99 university courses were online, and now it's 1 out of every 5. So that was in 2000, now it's about 1 out of every 5. So about 20% of the courses at universities are distance
That's huge.
education. Yeah.
Let me add one other number. I haven't asked for this in a couple of years, but one spring I asked how many students that were enrolled at our institutions were currently taking an online course, and 30% of all our students were taking one online course that semester. That didn't mean they were totally online, and some of our students are only taking courses online, which makes it complicated, but it's a big factor in the higher education process in Texas and has been for a number of years now.
It has implications for everything. It has ramifications for the way we deliver education. It has ramifications for the number of faculty we need. It has ramifications for the number of buildings we need, residence halls. It affects everything we do. So we're watching these numbers very closely.
A really quick question. On that point, Commissioner, when we are going across the state and we hear, so-and-so has, 58,000 students, of which 25,000 are online, you start hearing those kinds of numbers being thrown out. Do you have any comment on that in terms of what does that really mean when you're trying to really sell your university to say this is the population that we currently have?
Well, I don't think we have any really solid data on, for example, any possible variance in the quality of the courses. I think with the online courses can be as good as face-to-face courses, or they can be worse. And there probably is an important factor. We do know that the students that benefit most from online courses are better students that are more self-starting, that are more self-sufficient, that are more mature. Students that tend to be at risk, haven't performed well in their previous academic years, tend to struggle more in online courses. We know things like that, but online courses are changing so quickly, and that whole landscape is changing so fast, it's hard to make any conjectures about the current state of online education. We just know it's going to continue to grow exponentially. Is that fair?
Yes, it is. I can add, we do have a learning technology committee, which, or people at institutions who work in this area who have developed standards that are used specifically for online courses, and they periodically make changes. And in fact, they, I think every 2 years, survey institutions to find out certain trends and concerns. They just completed one in I believe in the past month. So, but it's something you have to watch. Raymond's exactly right. Things are changing constantly. And should note, beyond Texas, schools like Harvard and MIT are offering courses online through Coursera and edX. UT Austin's involved in, I think, edX. So there's a lot of attention to it, but it's still the case, as the commissioner said, that it still seems to work best for the most diligent students, those who would do well in class, but who know how to schedule. And so some of these are scheduled like regular classes, and some of them you can do whenever you want to. They're set up different ways, so you might be doing them at 3 in the morning if you're working during the day.
The other thing we do see a lot of, and that statistic included, those are hybrid courses where it's at least, I think it's got to be between 50 and 85% online, so it's not fully online, but a substantial part of the course is offered online for those students. So we see some different models, too, of online education.
While we're on the topic of online education, can I ask about what is the marketability of an online degree or a degree composed of mostly online classes versus a face-to-face degree?
I know that one question students regularly ask is, will my diploma look different? And most schools typically say no. But there's some Arizona State is probably one of the most active players in almost every field in online education, and their graduates seem to be doing well. Georgia Tech is actually offering a master's in some area of computer science. They are charging much less than if you're a campus student, but the data I've seen is their graduates are doing very well. I think, like many programs, it depends on who happens to recruit from certain places, how well the students know how to market themselves, coming back to our marketable skills. But I know that's a question. I do know, I've talked to some students who still question themselves online courses, but these are students I know who've liked being physically with people and acting. But I think they are, in my career, I've seen the development over many years, and these are much, much stronger courses than it were in the beginning. I still remember, Commissioner, a video, when it was mainly video of a Berkeley professor in a large lecture hall. They had a camera at the back, and he was putting equations on the board. You couldn't even read them. And that's what it amounted to. We're far beyond that now.
Yeah, I think right now, as we get more data, this may change, but I think now the reputation of online programs is very much connected to the overall reputation of the university. People think, well, Harvard's not going to offer any Mickey Mouse degree programs, and so I think it's still primarily the reputation of the institution itself.
Can I share an anecdote? So I was elk hunting in September a couple of years ago, and this guy, a friend of mine from San Antonio, had his grandchild there. And, so what do you do? Well, I go to UT. I'm a student in business. Well, how can you take a week off and go elk hunting? Oh, all my courses are online. And, of course, the degree, there's no indication, but, every one of them, the entire semester was online. So I guess it probably doesn't matter. Or you don't see it anyway.
I've got one question or comment. Has anybody performed an evaluation, those people who do online study versus actual going to classroom? What kind of learning, which is better? Has anybody tested these students, who's better prepared online versus classroom?
Well, there's certainly been research, and as Dr. Gardner was mentioning, I think they've done a lot of research about what types of students, I think for some students the online works better than for other students, and you can see some real performance variation depending on the student's preparation, background, grit, so I've seen that, and overall it's certainly an area that's studied, but I'm not sure I could provide any findings at this time.
Well, there are, I wouldn't be surprised if there are a few hundred studies that address that in one way or another. I do think there is Still, the reality just is on-campus classes that some are better than others, and part of it depends on the person instructing it. But I think there's more opportunity for quality control, overall quality control with online in some ways. At an institution that actively works within, some institutions actually have individuals to work with faculty who are experts in the area of producing online materials and things in which your average faculty doesn't have access to that in a classroom. So quality control, whether it's higher education or making semiconductors, is always an issue.
And Dr. Peebles just added that SACS, the accreditor, does require institutions to disaggregate their data in terms of online and not by learning outcomes, so that they can show that their courses are rigorous and quality courses in both areas.
I guess.
Julie made a note, passed a note to me, and I think that this would be a good topic for a focused discussion at a future meeting, so we'll plan on doing that. This is a good discussion I think we need to follow up on.
I guess we move on to agenda item 5B. Data highlight how rising graduate rates support the completion goal. Dr. Julie Eklund, Assistant Commissioner for Strategic Planning and Funding, will provide a presentation and be available to answer any questions. This item is for information only.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. The completion goal in the 60 by 30 tech strategic plan aims for the completion of 550,000 certificates or associate's, bachelor's, or master's degrees in 2030. A completion counts in the year it is awarded and does not depend on whether a student took 2 years or 10 years to reach their completions. But we know there are benefits to the state and to individuals when students complete in a timely manner. One way we examine the efficiency in which students move through higher education is by examining graduation rates. Graduation rates are not included as a measure in the plan explicitly, but it is an important piece of contextual information to know graduation rates, so we can know if we're on track to grow our completions to 550,000. So again, it's not in the plan, but we feel like it's important to monitor this, and we do look at graduation rates in our accountability system. As I described in the last presentation, we're seeing steady positive trends in enrollment, and since 2000, Texas institutions have also shown impressive increases in graduation rates. Further improvements, particularly in on-time graduation rates, and so that would be in 4 years at universities and 2 years at community college and technical colleges, will be necessary to achieve the goals of 60 by 30 techs. The coordinating board has been tracking graduation rates during the past decades by consistently examining degree completion among students entering Texas public colleges and universities. So basically, we look at entering students. For universities, a cohort of first-time, full-time students entering in a fall semester are tracked for 4 years, 5 years, and 6 years to determine graduation rates. Public universities have demonstrated impressive gains in graduation rates, particularly 4-year graduation rates, which have increased by nearly 17 percentage points since 2000. In 2000, fewer than 20% of first-time, full-time students graduated on time in 4 years. 5-year rates increased by 13 percentage points since 2000, and 6-year rates have increased by 11 percentage points between 2000 and 2017. And we show the growth here on the slide. For community colleges, a cohort of first-time, full-time students entering in a fall semester are tracked at 3 years, 4 years, and 6 years to determine graduation rates. Community colleges have also shown gains in their rates. 3-year graduation rates have almost doubled from 11% to over 21% since 2000, and 4-year rates have increased 11.4 percentage points. Graduation rates have improved for all race ethnic groups, often with African American students and Hispanic students demonstrating the largest improvements. For example, for 6-year rates at universities, which you can see on the slide on the bar graph on the left, African American student graduation rates increased by 7 percentage points, and those for Hispanic students increased by almost 7 percentage points since 2010, compared to a 3.5 percentage point increase overall. So those are our 6-year university rates. At community colleges, looking at 3-year graduation rates, African American progress was more modest, but the 3-year graduation rate of Hispanic students increased more than 10 percentage points compared to 8 percentage points overall. Our graduation rates focus on full-time degree-seeking students. Not surprisingly, when we also examine part-time students, we find they're less likely than their full-time peers to graduate within 4 years. So we saw about 37% for full-time students for a rate and 28% for part-time at universities. Part-time rates trail full-time rates even more after 6 years. Another factor to note is that many students in Texas transfer, and statewide graduation rates shown above include both students who start and finish at one institution and students who complete after transferring. Again, these are our first-time full-time students, but many of them start at one institution and graduate from a different one. So at universities, 52.8% of students started at and graduated from a single institution within 6 years of enrollment. An additional 8.2% of students who transferred to a public or private institution at some point graduated within 6 years. And this is where we talk about our same or our other in terms of our 6-year university graduation rates. That includes those who graduated, again, at the same or a different institution, and that brings our statewide graduation rate to nearly 61%. Graduation rate data will be updated in January, along with the rest of the measures in the accountability system. And I'm sorry, I should still be here. So sustained efforts to improve graduation rates are really paying off, and we had a wonderful session at our leadership conference the week before last, which highlighted some of those efforts around the state. More timely completion should remain a focus for institutions so that students not only complete, but do so without taking on unnecessary student debt or accumulating excess credit hours. In addition, students who complete in a timely way join the workforce earlier. That helps themselves, their families, and the state. So saving for a house, to start a family, for retirement, that can start earlier with more timely graduation. And if a student has less debt, they have more funds to put towards those other priorities. We also want to mention students can start contributing to the tax base and to their own Social Security accounts sooner if they're able to graduate in a more timely way. So for a minute, now I'm going to take you back to our completion goal. Again, we're leaving graduation rates, our completion goal in the plan. In 2017, the state conferred almost 334,000 certificates, associates, bachelor's, and master's degrees. So we have a long way to go to reach our goal of 550,000 completions. As I mentioned at the beginning, this review of graduation rates serves to support the completion goal. Grad rates are not part of the plan, but they will improve. As they improve, so will the state's completions, and that's assuming that enrollment at least stays flat or, as we hope, increases. Finally, I'm going to share one bonus item in this data highlight. So the Census Bureau recently released data for 2017, and I want to share with you the latest numbers for our 60 by 30 Tex-educated population goal. Of course, this is the overarching goal of our plan. So with this recent data that we just received this fall, we see that Texas has increased another 1.2 percentage points. So now we're at 43.5% of Texans ages 25 to 34 who have a certificate or degree. You may recall that the state needs to average about 1.3 percentage points each year to be on track to reach 60% in 2030. So this is the second year in a row where we've seen over a 1 percentage point increase. And I wanted to share this information with you. We're going to begin sharing it statewide and regionally with our folks who are working on our regional efforts towards achieving this goal. We think they'll be interested in their regional numbers that we've just received. You may recall we have a little lag in these data, so we're just getting the 2017 data now for our educated population goal. Moving into 2018, we'll have updated 2018 data for our other goals in terms of the plan, and we'll be sharing those with you at our spring board and committee meetings. And I'm happy to answer any questions
Just
at this time.
a quick reminder, when the Planning Committee actually developed the plan, we were just under 40%. So when they were talking about statewide, this really, for this population, translates to thousands of people.
Yes, it does.
I was looking at the community college graduation rates. When did the success points, outcomes-based funding, get introduced as law?
2011, I believe, in the 2011 session. Yeah.
Well, it's if you took that if you compress that graph and put a different scale on it, you can really see the impact that it had. That's a big deal.
Go ahead, Commissioner. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Well, one question, why don't we calculate 2-year graduation rates for community colleges?
This is the same as for universities, that the national process is 150% of time. So, I mean, we could add in 2, but it's, with universities, you know, we'd like people to graduate in 4, so the standard has been to go with, 2 more years, 50% more time. For community colleges, the same thing. But as you know, with universities, we do 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. We occasionally do 10 years. So we could do 2 years. We also do a 6-year baccalaureate rate for community colleges, which accounts for them moving on to universities. But these are the basic 150%.
Yeah, I think we should calculate 2-year completion rates because most associate's degree programs are 60 hours. If they're going full-time, they should be able to complete. I just think it creates more of an incentive to do it if we calculate it. The other thing is I think we should also calculate transfer rates because but we should include it on these charts. For example, for community college students, if you look at the 3-year completion rate, people are going to look at that and say, wow, those numbers are pretty depressing, from 10.8% to only 21.3, but if we include the transfer rate, that number will go up, and I think it's a better indicator of the success
Well,
of community
let me
colleges.
say that's my fault, because originally they included a 6-year, which had that, but we're trying to make sure we were parallel with that. But we certainly have that, and we can provide that, and, our accountability system shows that. Everything we do, includes that. But this is about graduating from the community college specifically, and I think the nice thing in this case about emphasizing the 3-year rate, it shows that there's really been remarkable improvement at the 3-year rate. I mean, it started low, and I think Mr. Stedman's point is, I think it shows impact of success points, because it's more important for people to complete a degree. Before, many students would transfer without completing an associate degree. Now more, or maybe transferring while completing a certificate. So we do have that, and we should probably have something on transfer in the future, because we've been tracking that for years.
I also want to mention that in terms of our universities, the majority of our students enter as first-time, full-time students and are included in these cohorts, but at our community colleges, I think only about half of our students come in as first-time, full-time, and are included here. For first-time entry, the other half are part-time, and then there's a very large number of students who've already been in higher education and when they enter a community college. And so those outcomes aren't included here, but now nationally they're starting to look at some other outcomes and iPads that look at completion for those students who perhaps were enrolled 20 years ago and are coming back in higher ed. And community colleges, of course, do a very good job with those older students who have already been enrolled elsewhere. So they wouldn't be reflected in these rates of first-time students.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I thought I heard that if you enter first-time student and take courses at one community college and you transfer to another, that's in these numbers or not in these numbers?
It is in these numbers. So if you were in a first-time, full-time cohort anywhere, you will be tracked through for wherever you complete, and you will be included. And
Right, so those don't fall through the cracks. but
No,
what-
they don't.
What does fall through the cracks are students who aren't first-time students.
Right, who are older, maybe already took some courses in another state or.
But they are
years ago.
calculated in the number of graduates.
Yes.
So everybody's always accounted for, but there's.
Is that right? Is this graduation percentage include those?
No.
Or
No.
only those that were first,
Yes, and only those who are first-time, full-time, and this is actually your point is the exact reason why for our goal for completion, we count all graduates. We don't use a graduation rate because it wouldn't include all students and show the success of institutions with students who are not coming in this first-time, full-time way, so that every single completion is included in that completion goal.
I think that's important because that is a big, especially in the community college, that's a big percentage of the cohort.
It is, and that's why we feel that's important.
And
to
one of
track
our
for the
strategies actually laid out in the plan is to get students back who haven't finished, and they years ago. And you know, that's an important factor going forward. Let's see.
Go ahead, Fred.
Oh, there's one other point I wanted to, I forgot what it was because of that discussion, but a data that fits with what the commissioner was saying that I think is important to know. If you look back over several years, 35% of our baccalaureate graduates had attempted at least 30 semester credit hours at a community college. And that, to me, is a really critical statistic. It's been 30 to 35% at UT El Paso, it's 50%. And what that tells you is the important contribution to our baccalaureate graduates in the state that community colleges are playing. That's at least a quarter of the degree. And people forget that the Community College Association has a higher number, but they're counting if you took, you know, a course. But I think when you look at the 30 semester credit hours, it shows there was a critical contribution. Not that one course isn't as well, but that the student was helped to get there because of that community college participation. They actually probably lowered the cost to their degree because the tuitions are so much lower at community colleges. And that's something we keep looking at as a reminder of the important contribution overall to our baccalaureate completions.
Go ahead, Fred.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Eklund, very good presentation. I think, you know, as I go around the state and talk to Chamber of Commerce and civic organizations, I think the biggest question is like where we started, you know, what our percentage is, like in the low 40s, and David said even before that was even lower. But I think it's very important, like you mentioned, it's regional to get this information out there. That I think, because the fact is that people are seeing this goal, and it's a great aggressive goal, but as we yearly as we go through, we want to show the incremental increases, because at the beginning of any project, obviously it's, you know, it seems insurmountable, but this is really good information, and I think we need to get this out there. I think a little bit more in order to be able to let people know, you know, what's actually happening, and saying that, you know, these are good success points that are showing that we are moving the needle. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We move on to agenda item 5C, is consideration of adopting commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the approval of the facility audit report. Mr. Tom Keaton, Director of Finance, Resources, and Planning, will be available for any question. Is there any?
And I
Go
do
ahead.
want to mention the report itself is actually included in your book, in your meeting book.
You go ahead.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. King.
Good morning.
I just had a question in reviewing the facilities report. I noted that 4 of the institutions that you audited, you're recommending for a re-audit, and I was able to determine 3 of them, and maybe I'm just missing this, but could you identify to the board just who the 4 institutions are? But more importantly than that, I think for the board would be for us to understand the trends that you're seeing as you're performing the audit. You know, there's some common trends I can see. There's some coding errors and some things, but if you had to just share with us probably the top 5, you know, errors that you're finding as you've stated in the report, would you mind sharing that with us?
Yes, ma'am. If I could answer your second question first, that would be easier, and then we can talk about the individuals. The facilities inventory, it's on the surface when you first look at it, it's very complex. But once you start working with it, there's a variety of best practices. And so the trend that we've seen is that the veracity of the data have greatly increased. A lot of that is due to the fact that the PRT, or the peer review team, is actually other institutions, 2 other institutions, and then 1 coordinating board member, or not coordinating board member, coordinating board staff, excuse me. And what it creates is a network of information. So people, if they get a question, can call and ask. Or you get new people online, and then the first thing to do is, I've never done this before, how do I do it? We line them up to go on a peer review team to serve as an observer. So the trend has been, actually the data has gone up greatly. So to the second point of that, probably the top 5 errors in the classification of instructional programs, or CIP codes. Each room is classified based on the first 2 characters, and that gives you a broad field: science, English, and then the second, or the last 4 go into those specifics. So it may be science, biology, geology, and then even subfields of that, so fellow characters. We only look at the first 2. And when we look at that, we sometimes, I think, for the ease of use, people use a common code. They'll just say, oh, everything's 11. 11 happens to be instruction. But what ends up happening is a lot of that isn't instruction that they're doing. We see when you get into departmental administration, say a department chair, part of that time is instruction, maybe 50% or so. But 50% of it is administration. And the system is in place to prorate that space. Now that becomes important when you start to look at a variety of things. When you look at, for instance, in regards to research, what space is being used for research? Well, that has a specific code. Well, you oftentimes see a faculty member, their office will be completely 21 or all research, but yet that person teaches. Well, that has implications for indirect cost recovery and a variety of things. And then, of course, aligning it with the space model long-term planning. We see that. We see that room types, which it defines it what we call space use, but room types is what you would think. That quite often you get some errors. They'll call it a conference room when it's really a meeting room. A meeting room is associated with a group of offices or vice versa. So that's the other error we see. Oftentimes when we call it out, the room won't be identified. There won't be a sign. Everybody knows this is the Joe Smith room, or that's classroom 2. But they have to have a unique identifier. And that goes right from the time it's constructed, and it's usually part of the plans themselves. Those would probably be the top 3. One of the things we've been pleasantly surprised with, and we started checking 2 years ago, was room capacities, which is room capacities. Yes, for classrooms and class labs, because that directly relates to space usage efficiency. We find that those are incredibly accurate. We very seldom, the errors that we find in them are when you have, say, movable fixed arm or arm tablet chairs. Somebody grabs a couple and puts them in another classroom. So we have some buffer space in there. So those would be the top errors that you see. The institutions that, now back to the first question, the institutions that we called for a re-audit or a remedial review, Texas Southern, well, before I get into the individuals, it takes quite a bit for us to recommend a remedial review. And some of these you'll see their scores weren't great, but the team looked and there was one error. There was one error or one misunderstanding that led to all of those individual errors that you saw out there. The teams then said, if you can fix it, and I know in one case I was on the audit, said if you can fix it before I outbrief the president at 3, we're not going to count it. And they went in and we looked on our system, they'd already uploaded it. So we don't want to go remedial review. But when you see a widespread a pattern and there's errors all over the place, that's when we'll ask. So the threshold for requiring a remedial review is very high. One of them, Texas Southern, there were errors in all different areas and relatively low scores. We actually gave them additional time. And, and in doing so, we also say, look, you call us anytime. And quite often the institutions do, and we help walk them through. So Texas Southern is one.
I have the rest of the list if that's helpful.
What? The list of remedials. Go ahead, Julie, please.
And then it's Prairie View, Lamar State College, Port Arthur, and Texas A&M University, San Antonio. Does that match your understanding?
Well, it would be on this list here.
Yeah, so I have scheduled for August 2019 for Lamar, same thing for A&M San Antonio, and then Prairie View, it recommends re-audit in 2 years, July 2019.
And I'd be glad to answer any.
So there's just, should be the four: Texas Southern, Prairie View, A&M, Lamar State College, Port Arthur. I first said Lamar, I should have spelled out the whole thing. Lamar State Arthur, and Texas A&M San Antonio.
Okay, terrific.
I can speak to each of those, or if you have any questions regarding.
No, I think that's a very good explanation, and the most important thing is that, the peer review team and the staff are working to assist the universities to make sure, because I can imagine it's a very complicated process. So I like that we're helping them and guiding them as they're planning all of their expansion and growth and everything they must have going on campus. So,
Well, the first thing we say in our end brief is this event is going to be something that happens to you, or it's something that happens for you. That's your choice how you view it. We choose to do something for you. And most institutions take it that way. Some get a little upset, but.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Mr. Keaton, I just wanted to compliment you. At the last 2 weeks ago at the Leadership Council for the Coordinating Board, we had different sessions we could choose, and I went to your session, and you're right, Ms. Costa, it's very complicated, it's detailed, and I learned a lot with the speakers, and you led that group about the facilities, and one thing that stuck out, and like I remember when I was in school, people didn't want to go to class on Friday afternoon, and that one thing that stuck out is that sometimes you have to use rooms for certain things, and basically the allocation is very complicated, as you probably understand better than most of us. And Mr. Keaton's explanation, I think, to the presidents, chancellors, regents, and trustees that were at that particular section was very detailed, and I did learn a lot about the specifics. So I wanted to say that I think you did a very good job at that session.
Thank you very much, sir.
Is this the audit that routinely occurs every 10 years? Or is that something different where
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
does it occur a minimum every 10 years on all universities, or what's the?
It's every 5 years. We do a review every 5 years.
So you've kind of ridden the fences every 5 years, so to speak, and
Yes, sir.
and come back.
Yeah, I think we're going towards the end of our second cycle.
And I'm not sure your Friday afternoon scenario has changed in the current.
Oh, it's Thursday afternoon now.
Well, we'll be able to show you that in the SUE report that we'll be producing. It'll
Mr.
tell.
Wilson, they used the time efficiently for other things, which was the impressive part, is they really clock every hour and how the systems in the university and buildings, which is the impressive part, I thought.
Yeah, a good example was they know that's a time they can get the carpets cleaned. Sometimes on a Friday afternoon, students won't be there. Yes. One other thing I want to add also, and I know Tom's trying to save his voice today, but
it's gone. It's not coming back for a while. It's okay.
But we do have peer review teams that go out with staff from the agency, from Tom's team, and I think that's very helpful because those peer review teams, I think, are very supportive in terms of helping the institution that's going through the facilities audit, and they often will serve as mentors if a school maybe has new staff on board, and sometimes you will see that there are issues that come up when there's new staff handling this, and those folks who go out for the peer review frequently will volunteer their numbers and their expertise so that staff can get in touch with another institution that's maybe been doing this for a long time and can provide assistance.
And can add that when this was first proposed, it looked like it was going to cost $1 million, and staff came up with this process, which was much more cooperative, working with people, working with the auditor at the school, which kept the cost down dramatically, and it has been much more cooperative and positive. So,
and the institutions, if I could add to that, when it was developed, I was actually at Texas Tech when it kind of started and got rolling, and that was one of the concerns, was the cost. The institutions can, at their discretion, not participate in the PRT, but they have to go hire a third-party auditor. One institution has done that, and nobody else wanted to follow suit when they got the results back. Because it wasn't a collaborative, helpful process. It was, here it is, and it was jaw-dropping. So there wasn't a process and interaction. But that has been the biggest good news story, is building in a network of peers to be able to, to rely on when a unique circumstance arises.
If there's no further question, I'd like a motion and a second for this motion, please.
To accept the report, or is that what we're?
Yeah.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion 5C passes. We move on to 5D. Is a report on facilities project that were submitted to the coordinating board. Dr. Julie Eklund, Assistant Commissioner for Strategic Planning, and funding is available for any question. This item is for information only. Any questions? If not, we move to agenda item 5E, is a report on Financial Aid Advisory Committee. Dr. Zelma DeLong, Executive Director of Financial Aid and a Scholarship at University of North Texas and Chair of the Financial Aid Advisory Committee, FAAC, will present a summary of the FAAC's recent activities and will be available for any questions. This item is for information only, please.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for giving me the opportunity to present the report on the Financial Aid Advisory Committee activities. On behalf of the committee members, we would like to thank you for approving the committee and providing us the ability to serve on this valuable committee. Over the course of the year, FAAC members reviewed, discussed, and provided feedback and recommendations regarding a number of financial aid topics. As a past chair of the committee, I would like to begin with the summary of the tasks completed this past year. The first task is a new priority deadline. As a result of the free application for federal student aid, which is the FAFSA, being available October 1st, the board approved the committee's recommendation that the priority deadline for state programs be changed from March 15th to January 15th, beginning FY 2020. This past year, members discussed the new date and how to update the financial aid community and students of the change. Members also assisted the coordinating board with the FAFSA on the web and paper FAFSA language regarding the state deadline. At our last FAAC meeting, we discussed the benefits and drawbacks of the state's priority deadline. Members reported moving the date earlier is a benefit. It encourages our students to apply for financial aid earlier. Initial feedback from several institutions, which also included the high school counselors, indicated at this time there were no concerns from students and parents regarding the new date. The next bullet, committee members provided input for the SB 887 student debt letter, which helped the coordinating board craft and finalize a template that is in statute and rule. At least annually, in support of the 60 by 30 text, fourth goal, which is the student debt goal, institutions of higher education that enroll one or more students receiving state financial aid administered by the coordinating board must disclose student loan debt to its students. The committee members had multiple discussions with Ginger Gossman, Senior Director, Innovation and Policy Development here at the coordinating board regarding the new Senate bill, SB 887, Student Loan Debt Disclosure, Proposed Rules and Requirements. Members discussed questions and suggestions from the financial aid community. From the discussion, the committee suggested a webinar to provide guidance for institutions and for institutions to share implementation plans. The coordinating board hosted 2 webinars to assist institutions with the implementation of SB 887. One webinar was on June 4th. It outlined the student debt letter requirements and assisted in the implementation. Another webinar was on August 28th, provided guidance on how to effectively communicate information presented in student debt letter required by the SB 887. So throughout the year, members continued to share how they were going to implement the requirement at their institutions. So moving along, the next bullet of tasks completed was the continued work of the Data Collection Subcommittee with the courting board to implement the new financial aid database, which we call FADS, process report and validation certification to consolidate the reporting. The data collection subcommittee consists of several courting board members as well as subject experts from institutions. Beginning FY 2018, institutions were required to follow a new FAD reporting schedule, which consisted of 3 separate reports. The Financial Aid Advisory Committee continued to work with the courting board to implement the new FAD process report and validation certification to consolidate reporting. Institutions now have the ability to electronically sign completed reports online. The subcommittee will now work on the next phase of the auto grant payment project. Specifically, the suggestions to utilize the grant payment rosters and other data already submitted to the courting board to allow institutions greater flexibility. The next bullet of summaries of tasks completed, members continue to discuss recommendations to align the retention of state aid documents with federal and retention timelines. The federal timelines is at 3 years. Effective FY 2018, the courting board changed the record retention from 5 years to 7 years. The members continue to discuss recommendations to align the retention of state aid documents with federal aid retention timelines. Due to the change of the FAD report to 3 times a year versus once a year, this should reduce the need for records being retained longer and align with federal 3 years to keep institutions from having 2 different record retention timelines. The next bullet, members provided suggestions for the courting board to have a web-based portal to update user information. This is to manage staff access out online. Instead of utilizing 3 different platforms, the institutions must provide user access information. Some members had a discussion about recommending and suggesting that the courting board build a portal that feeds all 3 databases into a web-based similar to what the Department of Education has. The last bullet I would like to highlight is critical. Members provided feedback on legislative proposals impacting financial aid for the 86th session of the Texas Legislature. In preparation for the Texas Legislature, members provided feedback on the courting board legislative proposals to John Wyatt, the Director, External Relations at the courting board. Those proposals were adopted by the board as priority recommendations for the 86th legislative session. In addition, a Financial Aid Advisory Committee Legislative Recommendations Subcommittee was created to provide legislative proposals. The subcommittee's recommendations will be part of the conversations with members of the specific legislators. In your annual report, there is a list of the specific recommendations. So at this time, the next slide. I would like to provide a summary of the recommendations to the board. The first one is to continue to work with the courting board by providing feedback and recommendations to help support the board, the courting board, with the 60 by 30 Texas goals. It is important for the committee to have ongoing discussions and provide the courting board with advice and recommendations regarding the development, implementation, and evaluation of state financial aid programs to ensure guidelines to help students receive state financial aid programs. In addition, the committee discusses initiatives to strengthen student participation and access to higher education. The next bullet and recommendation is to continue the work of the Data Collection Subcommittee. As mentioned earlier, the Data Collection Subcommittee has been successful with implementing the goal of streamlining data reporting. Thank you to the courting board staff under the leadership of Deshae Reed and financial aid experts from various institutions for accomplishing the goals. It is our recommendation to continue to meet on a regular basis to continue to improve other reporting processes. The next bullet is to continue to create and utilize FAAC subcommittees to review and identify topics. Over the last 2 years, we have seen the effectiveness and collaborative successes of creating and utilizing subcommittees, such as the one I just talked about, the Data Collection Subcommittee. Prior subcommittees were the Financial Aid Priority Deadline Subcommittee and then the Legislative Recommendation Subcommittee. It is my recommendation to keep utilizing these subcommittees with subject experts. The next bullet is to continue to provide feedback regarding legislative proposal recommendations from the financial aid community to make sure the intent of the law can be carried out toward state financial aid programs. The next bullet is to continue support of tuition set-asides. The recommendation is to continue to support that, which is vital funding institutions use towards scholarships, grants, work-study programs, and it helps students meet their educational goals, which support the 60 by 30 text goals. The last recommendation is to provide institutions access to students' complete state financial aid history, consolidating multiple databases into one central database, providing state financial aid history to students and institutions. That would be like the federal national student loan data system. This will help institutions and students see a snapshot of all their student loan debt and other state programs in one place. So in conclusion, I have served on the Financial Aid Advisory Committee for the past 7 years. Over the years, I have seen growth of the committee and continued collaboration with the coordinating board. I would like to personally thank Dr. Charles Poles and his team in student financial aid programs for their support and collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have
Yeah.
a comment. First of all, Ms. De Leon, thank you for your service and
thank you.
being on the committee and sharing that. Recently, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about financial aid in universities in terms of like middle-income families, you know, because there are a lot of folks in the lower-end bracket can get, you know, Pell and grants and things, and the higher-end don't need scholarships, obviously. But on the home equity loans, I think the article mentioned Stanford and some of the schools, private schools, but also how would that affect, or do you happen to know anything about Texas' financial aid program looking into that home equity change? I mean, this is very recent.
I am not aware of that. I don't know if Chad has any. No.
I mean, this
No.
is just
This is
something that
very new.
some universities, very new, I mean,
Yes.
within the last few weeks under, in late November. But I think that's going to be actually affect a lot of financial aid packages for a lot of students. And that's something I think that the committee probably is going to be looking at very carefully. And that hopefully will help in terms of access and hopefully help more students with financial aid. So that's something I think we need to be looking at.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you again for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you.
very much. Now we move to adjournment. Following adjournment, we will take a brief 5-minute break to allow staff to set up for the cause meeting. Do I have a motion and a second for adjournment?
So moved.
Thank you.